Hello, this is Charlie, and welcome to Kratom Sobriety.
Hi, this is Krista, and this is episode 14.
Today we have an interview with Decima, who's an administrator of one of the Facebook Quitting Kratom groups, and she has very good advice. She's one of those people that experienced a seizure from taking Kratom, which is a serious risk. To follow up from last week where we gave you some non-12-step groups, now we're going to talk about some tips on how to use any of these groups for support from Kratom abstinence. I wanted to run something by you, Krista, before we get into that.
Okay.
So if smoking cannabis but refraining from everything else is called California sober, I want to propose that if you're clean from everything else and you're using Kratom, then you're Florida sober.
I like it. It makes sense. Yeah. I mean, like, Florida's crazy. The county I'm in, there's maybe like 11 or 12 Kava Kratom bars. And I've actually, like, we've gone to Orlando, we've gone up to St. Augustine, like, we've traveled around to hit other Kava bars. So Florida's pretty crazy. But the article that I'm covering later in this episode, she was talking about Kava Kratom bars up in New York City. And then I know there's several in Georgia. So it's definitely in other states, but I think Florida is kind of
the capital.
Yeah, the mecca of all things Kava and Kratom.
Because of the podcast, I do end up interacting with people online so that I encounter current Kratom users. And they're usually not pleased with me. And I think Kratom is a fine harm reducer. And I actually think pot is probably better than drinking a couple fifths a day. And there's actually something called high sobriety program where it's like transition from booze and alcoholism to smoking pot. And if you want to call that California sober, that's great. These folks will say, well, I'm using Kratom and I'm more in recovery than you. It was your addict thinking. That's why you had trouble with Kratom. Or you're just jealous that we can use Kratom and be in recovery and you can't. Okay, fine. You can be Florida sober.
All right. So we're going to get going on finishing or continuing from what we were talking about last week. And we're going to talk a little bit about smart recovery and NA. If you're trying to abstain from Kratom use, you can find support and benefit from attending alcohol or drug recovery meetings. But two fellowships that may be the best fit for kicking Kratom, we mentioned last week. Smart recovery, I would say, because it's not substance specific, can also include process addictions like sex or gambling. And then NA, I've got some information here. Their philosophy in the NA program is a drug is a drug is a drug. They have a clarity statement that says, when differentiating between substances, for example, like drugs and Kratom, NA doesn't see these as two diseases, that one drug is somehow separate from the rest, requiring special recognition. Narcotics Anonymous makes no distinction between drugs. Our identification as addicts is all-inclusive, which allows us to concentrate on our similarities, not our differences.
Thanks. And a big shout out to the folks in the quittingkratom.org WhatsApp group for many of these ideas. I mean, the one issue with Smart Recovery and NA is their in-person meetings locally might be limited, but I know that there's a ton of online meetings for both of these. All the groups we talked about last week and AA are great options for the tips we're going to give. Smart Recovery, that it's not really substance specific, and it's not religious, and it's a cognitive behavioral approach to addressing addiction is a good fit. Jacob last week talked about his experience with those meetings. And then NA, because they don't make any distinction between booze, prescription drugs, street drugs, or Kratom, if it's a mind altering substance. But we do have some suggestions for any of these groups to like how to leverage them, even though the people will be talking maybe about booze or drugs, how to make the best of those meetings while you're trying to quit Kratom. So the first suggestion is focus on the behavior, not the substance. So the idea is the underlying addiction and recovery principles are the same or similar, and getting better is not really about the substance of Kratom, but developing a new mindset, coping skills and lifestyle. And one suggestion we heard was you can refer, or a couple of suggestions, you can refer to kratom as your drug of choice or as a legal over-the-counter drug.
Okay, and another one is on the topic of relating to shared experiences. So while the substances may differ with addiction, the emotional and psychological challenges can be similar. Kratom, as they are with drugs or alcohol, as they are with, any substance. Identifying with and listening to others can provide insight and empathy. And that pretty much, reiterates what NA's clarity statement said, when it says, which allows us to concentrate on our similarities, not our differences. So I've heard that in the rooms, try not to separate yourself and I didn't do this, I didn't do that, and instead listen and try to get the common shared experience of what addiction does to people and how it makes you feel.
So number 3 would be recognizing common triggers and coping strategies, understanding and discussing these triggers, and then the coping mechanisms for them. Even if the substances are different, some things you can relate to. For example, like if you're in an AA meeting and everybody's talking about going to the bar, if you're in one of these places like Florida or Georgia or New York City that has bars with kratom in them, even though the substances are different, the trigger of going to a wet place is the same. And, and if you're not in a place with the social setting, for example, going to like a vape shop, if you're trying to quit kratom, that's a wet place.
So seeking a supportive sponsor or mentor is important. What you want to try is to find somebody within the group you're attending who has experience dealing with maybe more than one substance or understands the challenges of cross addiction. You can talk about kratom specifics outside the meeting. Work in a 12-step program and you want to get a sponsor, go ahead with that. That's kind of a 12-step thing. But I think in any, if it was Smart Recovery or Life Ring or anything we talked about last week, finding somebody who maybe has some experience in the program, to be a mentor and guide you through it is probably a good idea. It's hard to do this alone. So I think getting the support of somebody who has more experience is probably going to be really beneficial and help you on your path.
Number 5, educate the group. Once you get acclimated and you kind of get a feel of things, and you might during that time hear somebody else already bring up kratom, and then that there's already, that's an opening for that the group is flexible. Or if you learn about the rules of the group, somebody mentioned in the WhatsApp, it's not the 1950s anymore. People are bringing up other issues, the rooms, both, the 12 steps and these other places. Before, talking about being on like an antidepressant was taboo. And that's definitely changed. Seen in my state, marijuana became legal in the last couple of years. In AA, people are bringing up about and changing their sobriety date because they started using pot, and then that became a problem. Once you get into these groups, it might be a place where you have the opportunity to educate people about kratom. The one challenge that we did identify is, because I have heard about somebody learning about kratom at an NA meeting. That was the start of their kind of painful kratom addiction. But you always worry about, especially people that are like recently clean, the idea of just talking about it as an over-the-counter drug. It's kind of the principle of why someone like in the kratom forums, you can always talk about kratom for the most part for that reason.
Finally, consider starting a new group. Start your own group. If there's enough interest in the community, maybe you're talking to people and what else can be done. You could explore starting a new support group, a kratom addiction recovery group. There are a lot of organizations, churches, a lot in my area, community centers, mental health clinics might be willing to provide a space for such meetings. I think that's a great idea. I mean, that's why it's good to talk about it. Maybe keep it to outside of meetings or whatever, but talk about it, see what need is there.
Yeah, that's what we did. A bunch of us listeners of the Dopey podcast talked to each other and said, let's make and we started the meeting at 7:00 on Thursdays. That was the beginning of my kratom quit, was because of that, starting our own group. Well, I think that was a good discussion. So now for our interview with Decima. Hello. Today we have an interview with Decima, who's an administrator of a Quitting Kratom Facebook group. Hi, how would you describe yourself to a stranger?
Hey, Charlie. Thanks for having me on. I would probably describe myself as an eclectic person. I have a lot of interests. I'm a high energy person. Some people would probably describe me as a little extra. I have a lot of bravery and confidence, but at the same time, I'm a super kind person.
What was your first contact with Kratom and what was it like?
So what led me to Kratom was it was interesting. I was actually searching. This was back in 2014 when we were just learning about Kratom.
Mm-hmm.
I was searching on the internet for basically, I guess, like at-home remedies, things to help with withdrawal symptoms from Suboxone. I had been down that opioid road that led me to Mat and, methadone and then finally Suboxone. And I was just ready to get off. So at that time, like I said, it wasn't widely known. I really literally only found one website at that time that was selling it.
Okay.
And I just bought a little bit to try it. And I should have known at that time because I won't advertise any websites, but that website had the word MU, in the name. So I should have known then something was up because it did bring me relief. And then, it was like joining Facebook groups about Kratom. I started joining a lot of pro-Kratom groups actually.
Yeah.
And that's how we got to know the vendors and they, they gained popularity more and more over the years like that. But yeah, we were doing fun stuff like parachuting it, putting it in fruit roll-ups, No, do not do that. It's very dangerous.
So you were part of, would you consider yourself once an advocate for Kratom?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I wasn't out there rallying or going, I wasn't talking to council or senators or anything like that, but I was in the groups cheerleading it on, telling my friends about it. I really was at one time.
Yeah, a lot of people find their way. I mean, you were early on, but look or find out about Kratom to get off Suboxone, and that kind of leads to the next question, which is, so it sounds like you have a past history with other substances.
I do. I have all that, typical childhood trauma, the dark humor that goes with it, all of that. I've actually battled pretty much every drug in my lifetime. And to be honest, nothing has really gripped me the way Kratom has. And I know that sounds crazy, but it literally has been the absolute hardest, most sinister and insidious demon I have battled. Yeah, it's really been an issue for me.
Riff off of that question, have you thought about why? I guess I'll start getting into your story a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. And I will get into that a little bit more as well. It is really important, to get in there and find out why. Obviously, I feel like it has a lot to do with childhood trauma that, I hide from my feelings rather than face them. I never really had anybody as a role model to teach me how to deal with things that I went through. Yeah, it's definitely important to get in there and find out why.
And I guess why Kratom was harder.
I'm glad you asked me that because I hear and see a lot of people say things like, well, it's not as dangerous as heroin or fentanyl, But the truth is, for me, it is because Kratom to me is insidious in the way that it sneaks up on you. You think that it's something that is manageable and safe at first. When it comes to things like heroin and fentanyl, I know that what that is. I no. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going to go there because I know. So therefore, it's not as dangerous for me as kratom has been. Also, the fact that kratom is so easily accessible. And I am all about adults making their own choices and things like that. But we do not sell opioids in gas stations, but we do sell kratom in gas stations. And that has really made it hard for me. Absolutely, the accessibility.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard over and over the insidiousness. At first, it doesn't blow up your life, but it slowly over time it does. And then it just, but yeah, with heroin or even prescription drug abuse, there's just all sorts of warnings, and it's everywhere with our peers on in the media that there's consequences with.
We know what it is.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
We know exactly what that devil is.
So when did your kratom use start to become a problem for you?
So like you said, it's easy to be a functional addict on kratom. It's easy to be a functional addict on kratom. So it is insidious. To be honest, it never really ruined my life in any way like other drugs had in the past, other than I spent more money than I should have probably shopping and getting that dopamine dump. But it affected my health in a way that other things had never, it really just, it got to that point. I think that I knew it was a problem for me when no matter how many times I quit, no matter how long I quit for, I always relapsed. And I just never had that problem before. It just got to a point where I was feeling sick if I didn't have it. And I had never had that happen with any other substance before either. The literal having to take it just to function for the day. Waking up an hour early every day to take the kratom, lay back down, give it time to work, and hope and pray that it kicks in before I start puking and it ruins my day and I don't make it to work on time. It's just that's crazy.
Yeah.
And when you're there, it just feels so hopeless. So yeah, that was definitely when I knew it was a bad problem, and I probably was going to need more help than I could give myself.
Did kratom lead you to relapse on some of the other substances, or were you able to keep off the other stuff?
You know what's really crazy about that is, and this is a hard thing to admit, that yes, it did, but it wasn't the using the kratom. It was the quitting kratom. And that also was another sign to me that it was a real problem. When I would quit, I would try to fill that hole that kratom left with literally anything else. And nothing filled that hole. It did not matter what it was, what substance, what activity, what feeling, like there was just this hole that kratom left. And yeah, during detox, in fact, we can talk about that a little more later when it comes to my shot. That did hold me off a little on my shot.
So I know you have quit multiple times kratom. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So the first time I quit, I was really, all gung ho. We actually started the group. Well, somebody else started the group and asked me to help, and I came on board. And that was actually super motivating for me. I was able to quit. I got super healthy, started juicing, exercising, doing everything the right way. Felt great. I was like the role model for sobriety for 2 years. Had a baby, went through some trauma, and immediately started using again as soon as life got hard. Quit again, started again, quit again, start again.
Okay.
And it was just back and forth. I guess it always came down to not wanting to face things that were going on in my life. Or feeling like I have too much to do and there's just so much that needs to be done. I need this little boost, mother's little helper.
Yeah. I mean, when you have a young child, I remember they're teenagers now, but my sleep was disrupted. And then the child raising duties was on top of my job that I already had, and then all the other household tasks. So, I mean, I know both of us have histories of addiction, but I mean, I hear many people, they're not necessarily using kratom to get high. You know, it's not like, many of us are like adults with jobs and big life stuff that we're managing. You know, obviously there was some euphoria, but it wasn't like, it sounds like you're using it to function for your daily task.
Exactly. And I'm not going to deny that I got a high from it. I definitely got a high from it. And I spent a lot of time, wasted a lot of time sitting around waiting for that high to kick in so that I could catch that sweet spot, try to get some things done, counting the hours until it was time to get, that feeling that you could do anything, that we all know eventually runs out, becomes short-lived, shorter and shorter.
Yes.
But yeah, it definitely was functional, highly functional. In fact, I made so many improvements in my life. And we bought a house, I bought my first car, bought my first motorcycle. I got an amazing job, just kept climbing the career ladder. Like I was functioning, highly functioning. It was just me, my spirit, my person.
Got a house, a career advancement while you were on kratom.
Right. But inside myself, it was a different story than what what I was creating in the world, and what I was creating in myself was a lot of shame and disappointment and beating myself up and just, why are you like this? You should not be like this. Like it's crazy how it can look one way and you can be accomplishing so much, but in reality, you're just living with this demon,
That's the paradox of kratom. I mean, there's a lot of high functioning alcoholics. I'm going to make a stereotype of like maybe a heroin addict that might not be applicable to everyone, but with the stereotypical trajectory of a heroin addiction, the trajectory is the other way, where you start to lose jobs, you lose housing, you lose your relationships for the most part, not always, but in kratom, it's not unusual to, and I think for me that was part of at first, because I did get things done. I clean out my garage. In the end, I was just wasting time,
trying
high
to
on the
keep
couch.
up with all of it like now I have all these
Yeah,
things I got to keep up with.
yeah. I mean, eventually, I couldn't even do I'd have a bunch of dirty dishes, and I'd have to have a kratom shot to just do the dishes, which is
Right.
ridiculous.
Exactly. Oh, I can totally relate.
What was the hardest part of quitting this time?
So the hardest part of quitting this time, I actually haven't heard many talk about this, but I know I'm not the only one. So I have been living comfortably in this kratom bubble. Everything just kind of bounces off of it. All the bad things that are going on in my life, all the feelings, any issues that really should be addressed, they just kind of bounce off. And I'm in this warm bubble. But once you quit, that bubble pops and
Mm-hmm.
everything is still there and you still have to deal with it. And that was really hard for me at first, but I am so grateful that I have that clear mind and the sobriety now to deal with it. Um, because I couldn't before. I wouldn't let myself. And even if I did, I didn't have the emotional maturity or the anger issues. We all know that kratom rage.
Yeah.
It was a mess. So now it's like everything is still there. There's no bubble to bounce it off. I have to deal with it, but I'm able to deal with it in a different way now. It's not easy. It's definitely super
Yeah.
hard. But yeah, that's been a challenge for me.
I know you mentioned previously when we discussed that some of the problem after having 2 years clean and then relapsing, I know you expressed to me a lot of disappointment in yourself, and that sounded like that was a barrier, and also that you were sort of a leader in the quitting kratom kind of world, as much as you can, being a moderator of a social, and that you felt that also was a barrier.
Yes, there was definitely a lot of shame in that. I would kind of disappear because, you're trying to advocate for being this healthier, better person, and then you can't even do it yourself. It was really hard for me, and I actually thrive and do better when I have that support, but it's kind of like I'm too ashamed at that time to go for that support. So it's kind of a catch-22. But yeah, there's definitely, which I've had to let that go. I'm a human being. Nobody asked me to be their role model. Nobody asked me to do anything but provide. They didn't even ask me to do that, but that's what I'm trying to just provide a safe place for people to find the support they need. So I'm just going to
and that's
do
good
me.
advice. I mean, I kind of worry. The reason I asked is that I kind of worry about it for myself because I'm kind of a perfectionist, and sometimes relapse is part of recovery, and because and this has been very rewarding doing this podcast, and it's helped reinforce my abstinence. But I worry, like if I slip, like, will I just, disappear then, because I'll be just so embarrassed that would be ridiculous. But I think about that, and I think, well, I need to take steps to prevent it, and then I'll have to have the humility that you do, if you mess up, it just,
right. Well, when you're passionate about something, which I feel you are passionate about this podcast, and I'm passionate about my kratom group. So something about that just ties you to it no matter what. Like, I will never leave it. All the original admins and mods are gone. They're all wonderful people. But I will just not let go because I'm so passionate about it. And I know that it helps me. So I feel like you probably have that too.
I do, we added Krista as a co-host, and so I have committed to doing this for a year, and I'm not sure, I've actually talked to some other people. I might have other people take over, and I might be more of a producer. I still be passionate and involved, but maybe it won't be as time consuming, and then somebody else can have the experience I'm having, and it can live on, but I got to live in today, but that's sort of where I'm at. You mentioned experiencing seizures on kratom. Can you say what happened?
Yes, I would love to talk about that because I feel like people are not taken seriously when they talk about these seizures sometimes. And I get that because I actually used to question it myself as a big pro-kratom person. I was just kind of like, oh, they had other things in their system. Like, I said all that and thought all that. I get that. However, looking back, I feel like there were precursors to these seizures a lot more than I knew at the time. When you get like the wobbles, as we call it, in the eye, when you get dizzy and things, like looking back, those to me, those are the same feelings that I had right before I had my seizures. Let me also say I'm 48 years old and I've never in my life had a seizure. However, this year alone, 2023, between February and April, I had three seizures that were so bad I lost consciousness, memory, ended up in the ambulance, the hospital, the whole 9 yards. So nobody can tell me that kratom does not cause seizures and that it doesn't kill, because I literally thought, am I dead? When I finally came to, I was so scared, frightened. Honestly, that's why I'm sober now. My last seizure was April 26th. My son is a police officer, and he was the first person to respond. Not knowing what was going on, looking back at my door cam and seeing my baby boy crying and his sergeant comforting him. Whew, I'm going to get emotional right now. Just, it was very humbling. Yeah. So that was my kratom rock bottom. Please take these seizures seriously. Anybody listening to this, please do not doubt it. If you feel like there's something going on with your health with kratom, anything. Like we just don't know. And I'm sorry to go off a little bit on a soapbox here, but we are the guinea pigs and we do not know what this stuff is doing. And a lot of us have been doing it for so long that we're now finally seeing the long-term effects. So don't try to tell me that it's not harmful.
I find it frustrating, the dismissiveness and the discounting.
And that flat out denial.
Yeah, it's like kratom is always innocent, and it's not like we're trying to give kratom a bad name. It's just it's a reality, and people should know about it. So you were saying you weren't on any other kind of medications or doing any other kind of drugs?
No. And that's another reason, like another like epiphany for me was after all was said and done, I literally felt like I had a near death experience. And I looked at it so deeply, like if I had died that day, if I know my family, they would have had an autopsy done. They would have had a toxicology report done. And I know that my death would have been listed as kratom. Period. Nothing else.
Yeah.
That was all I had in my system. And marijuana. I won't forget Mary Jane. But yeah, I do not want to be that statistic. So that, yeah.
I'm not an expert. I think one of the main risks with cannabis is actually accidents.
Right. While you're high.
Do you mind me asking how much kratom you were consuming at that time?
Oh, yeah. I'm actually glad you asked me that too, because that's another misconception that you must be doing ungodly amounts of kratom to have seizures or extracts or just totally abusing it, which I will admit that I was an addict and did abuse kratom. I took way too much, way too often, daily, every day. That's too much for me. But my dosage in comparison to a lot of people I've seen was really not that high. I was averaging about 15 grams of powder a day, taking it 2 to 3 times a day. On my heavier days when I started having seizures, that would be days that I had things going on, concert, going, a lot of activities or something, to take a lot more. Say 8 or 9 times that day. And that's when I would end up having a seizure.
I'm so glad you survived and you're with us. And
yes, me too.
Your seizure was actually exactly 3 months ago to the day.
It was. Wow. You're right. How about that? The last time I used kratom was May 31st. So it actually took me another month to finally stop. But I just knew I was going to this time. I don't know. Something was different. I just knew.
So how did the first month of your quit go? Starting May 31st.
So the first month was really hard because I knew I wanted to get the Vivitrol shot. I have been down this road so many times with kratom. I even did daily naltrexone in the past that worked well for me. But with it being a daily pill, I found it easy to manipulate it. So I just knew that I wanted to do Vivitrol. To make a long story short, there's only one doctor in my area. Wow. That can do it. Like I said earlier, I had a little issue with passing the drug test at first to get it, so I had to wait. The doctor actually ended up in the hospital with his own health problems. So what I'm trying to say is that first month, I had everything thrown at me that should have made me give up and always had made me give up in the past. And I just refused. I don't know what it was, but I just knew I knew I was done, and I was crying and screaming some days and really upset, but damn it, I was hanging in there. I knew that if I used, I was going to end up not being able to get my shot. And so even though I hadn't got my shot yet, the shot was helping keep me sober in that way. I didn't know how long I needed the kratom to be out of my system, but I knew I did not want to go into precipitated withdrawal from that shot.
So you to get the shot, you had how much time do you have to have free of kratom?
So this part, we don't have a lot of information out there.
Okay.
So we don't know for sure, but my doctor wanted it to be out for 7 days. Um, but like I said, he ended up in the hospital. So that 7 days actually turned into 21 days. I finally got my shot on June 21st and I did it. I couldn't believe it. I did it. It was one of the best days of my life.
And did the shot immediately, or once you got your body acclimated to it, did it help with the withdrawals and with the cravings?
It did. I actually didn't really believe my doctor. He said, once you get this shot, you're not even going to think about getting high anymore. You're just going to be so busy living life. You're not even going to. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Well, there were a few days of I was a little tired. I couldn't eat anything for about 4 days. But then all of a sudden I'd say the 5th day, I just woke up back to normal and I never think about kratom anymore other than in this context, in a recovery context, when I'm, supporting others or reaching out for support or talking about kratom addiction. I just do not even think about using at all, which is the way it's designed. So it's pretty amazing. It's almost like a cheat code, I kind of feel like, but I feel like I should probably clarify, though, that Vivitrol, naltrexone, is nothing like Suboxone or methadone. It's not, you're right. It's an opioid blocker. I do not get any kind of a buzz or a feeling from it at all. If I quit it, if I don't get my shot next month, I'm not going to get sick in any way. It does not, it's not a partial, and I'm probably going to butcher this word, antagonist.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no euphoria. There's no feeling from it. It's just an opioid blocker.
Maybe a first line choice then, because there's less risk factors there. One, you won't have withdrawals from it, which is a big argument against something like Suboxone. How did you manage the withdrawals during those first 3 weeks?
Honestly, the best thing for my withdrawals, or what I found the most helpful, I'll be honest, I actually got pretty good at quitting kratom physically. There's no way to get through the withdrawal, to bypass it completely. You're gonna have withdrawal, but I had gotten pretty good at finding out what supplements, nootropics, things like that work best for me. I will say that starting those things early enough, a lot of people wait until they jump, then start the supplements, and that's just not going to work. It's going to work better if you go ahead and start taking those things, things like DLPA, amino acids, things like that, vitamin C, anything like that you want to start healing your brain with. Go ahead and start taking those things 6 to 8 weeks or longer, even before you jump, when you're tapering, before you go cold turkey, however you decide to do it. If you're going to use supplements.
That's advice I haven't ever heard before. So while you're tapering or preparing the cold turkey, begin your supplement routine. Okay.
100%, because most of them take 6 to 8 weeks to start working. Things like DLPA, they help your brain release dopamine and endorphins again naturally. It's an amino acid, and it can also help you lower your kratom intake while you're tapering because it's a bit of a potentiator. You start feeling better on your own, so you don't need as much kratom, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It definitely worked for me.
Great advice. What supports were you able to find to maintain abstinence beyond the medication?
So the support that I have right now, really calling on the ancestors is a big one. Spirituality. And I'm laughing, but at the same time, it's a big one because I consider myself a very spiritual person, and kratom kind of took that from me. And once that was ripped off and I could feel things again, we all seem to have that common experience. When you're on kratom, if you're a spiritual person, or for me anyway, it had a way of kind of feeling that for me. Like I found like I was blocked there. I had a hard time connecting. So once I was able to feel things again, have emotions, enjoy music, reach out to my ancestors and hear them back. I mean, it is just a really amazing feeling. So definitely my spirituality is a support, but also humans, friends, family that never give up on me, social media, my group, support groups, going to meetings, sharing my story. I find a lot of support when I speak out because a lot of people are afraid to speak out, I think. And it's not easy for me, but when I do, I feel supported.
Yeah. Well, I think on a happier note, so what are some of the upsides of now being kratom free?
So I actually have so much more energy now. I used to be so afraid of what am I going to do? How am I going to feel good? How am I going to have energy without kratom? I had this love-hate relationship with kratom. Even though I hated kratom, I loved what kratom did for me. I actually used to compare kratom to, and probably still will compare kratom to a toxic ex. Like they make you feel so good in the moment, but they're not good. They're toxic. So it's been really great to get up and leave my house without having to take a toxic ex anywhere with me. I just get up and go. I get up when it's time to go to work. I don't have to get up an hour early. There's never enough time in the day to get all the things done, but I just remember always being so scared that I wouldn't be able to do it. And now I'm just like, what was I afraid of? Like, this is amazing. It feels so much better than it ever did on kratom. It's night and day. It really is.
Yeah, when your natural energy comes back.
And it's better than ever. Like you said, I feel like that's the good stuff. That's what we have been searching for. So it's there.
All right. What is your best advice for someone getting ready to quit kratom?
I have a little list of some tips because I think I have quit so many times. I think I am an expert. but but number one, you have to tell somebody. You have to find somebody, even if it's online, a meeting, anybody. You cannot do it alone. I know you want to. I know you think you can. I thought I could. You cannot. You need to tell somebody, find some support. We also want to make sure that we address why we're using. We're going to get in touch with our inner child. I actually took little photographs of myself as a child and put them on my desk and my mirror, my nightstand. And I looked at her and I said, you deserve this. And it sounds really cheesy, but there's so much power in hearing your own voice cheer yourself on. I will look in the mirror, grab my face and say, you got this. We have to get in touch with that inner child. Next, I'm going to say, if you can taper, even if it's just a fast taper, it's going to make it a little easier. I understand we don't all have that willpower. I never could do a long taper. I always did like a 1 week quick taper. So definitely taper. Like I said early, start the supplements early. You're also going to need to give yourself some grace. Look at yourself, like I said, that inner child. You wouldn't beat that child up. You wouldn't want anybody beating that child up. You have done so much. You have come so far and you deserve this. I also want you to acknowledge all of your successes. The worst thing we do is expect perfection. We think that if we go 7 days without kratom and then we take kratom on day 8, we have messed everything up and we are worthless and we just can't do this. But you know what? You still took 7 days without kratom. You still did that. So please, please acknowledge those successes.
Yes.
And the way that I always measured that is by looking back. I know we're not supposed to, but we do need to. We need to see how far we've come. You need to look and see, am I further than I was 2 months ago? And if the answer is yes, pat yourself on the back, reward yourself, keep going. You've got this. And that's my final bit of advice, because this was my mantra for years. Never give up. I do not care how many times you fall. And you're going to see me say this in the group over and over again to everybody. We all relapse, but please never, ever, ever give up. Just never, ever, ever give up.
Really moving advice. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I one thing I've come to think, reframe in the last couple of weeks is, I had a January 1st, like it was a New Year's resolution. I'm going to get off kratom. And I made it like 5 days between like January 5th and March 22nd when I finally quit. I had all sorts of starts and fits. And I had one time when I went like almost a week. And now I have reframed that instead of beating myself up and that was sort of a wrap.
Right.
That was sort of a taper. It was a chaotic taper. If I had taken the max amount of kratom that I was that whole period, I might have been dead, or I would have spent a lot more money. But so it was good that there was breaks in there. Everything changed. I was trying to do it on my own. Like I didn't know who to tell. I mean, partly I was like, nobody knows what kratom is at least in my immediate world.
I was just going to agree with that. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes I've been making through the years was, I even hid it from my significant other, my kids, no, it was the secret, the shameful secret. And we all know what that does to us. So definitely tell somebody. I'm learning one big thing is I'm not going to make everybody happy, and I got to stop trying. And also for myself and for everybody, we have got to not judge others and their path, how they're getting where they're getting. We're all there for the same reason. And it's really easy sometimes for us to look at somebody's way and say, oh, because we've been there or whatever reason, or we know somebody, or we've seen this, or we just feel that way, and cast judgment. And we all do it. I see it. I've been guilty in the past of passing judgment on different ways, and I'm not even going to call out just different, not seeing eye to eye. And I have really learned a lot from just stopping and trying to see it from somebody else's point of view, gaining different perspective, and realizing that we are literally all there feeling the same things and just reaching out for the same thing. And I get so much more from making the connections than, judging one another. So that's a big one for me.
On Facebook, what should they search for the groups to find? I know it's a private group and then you have to admit people, but how do they find you on Facebook?
So the name of the group is Quitting Kratom Support. If I'm not mistaken, it was created in 2016 or 17. We have Quitting Kratom Support, and we also have Quitting Kratom Support subgroup where we do discuss MAT there. We do have those separate. And if you're unable to find those, you can look me up, DEC, Dannyse, DANYESE. I'll be happy to make sure that you are approved.
And I can put that in the show notes?
Sure, that's fine. Started picking up our meetings again. They were pretty popular at one time, and then I did the whole falling off the wagon thing and kind of dipped out. Yeah. So now we are working on bringing those back, and they seem to be going pretty good. We'd be happy to have anybody join on Thursday night. I post the information for the meetings in the group, as well as I have an email list. So you can, if you don't want to join the group and you just want to join the meeting, you can reach out to me and I will be happy to add you to the email notification list.
Thank you for that. I'm glad to have that extra resource for folks. 2 more questions and we'll wrap up on a more fun note. What is your go-to music when having a horrible day?
It's just like everybody else that you've interviewed. I've been listening to this one because we all just love our music and the way it sounds again and feels again. I'm a music junkie, a concert junkie, but I love music from 50s bop to 7-Year Bitch, Viking music, bluegrass. I really love female rappers. The very first concert I ever went to was the Cranberries And just to give you some ideas of some of the concerts I've been to lately, I've recently seen Jewel. I've seen her a couple of times. She's one of my favorites. Bailey Zimmerman. I saw Bia and Lil Durk, Chevelle, and I even saw JoJo Siwa recently at one of her last concerts. So I just adore music.
Well, you weren't kidding when you said you were eclectic.
All over the place.
Well, is there anything else you would like to add before we close out our conversation?
The only thing that I really want to add, I've already said, but I just want to say it again. Tell your story. You never know who's listening. You never know who's reading. You never know who needs to hear or see the exact things that you're saying. Some of the people that have spoke on your podcast, I've just found myself just so moved. And I've even reached out to a couple of them because it's just, you just never know. And that's, hearing back from somebody. So just think who might see it or hear it that doesn't reach out. You just never know. It could be exactly what somebody needs. We need to end the stigma. Never give up.
And it's it's a double stigma, because like if you're an alcoholic, and it's actually kind of trendy now to like be alcohol free, fine to like talk crap about booze, but it's kind of the opposite about kratom. We have this addiction, and then we have to hide in our private social media forums because we'll just get harassed.
Well, that definitely should. You actually bring up a great point because that telling your story, it definitely should come with a warning, because I did speak to my city council about kratom in my city, just to make people aware, because people just aren't aware. But that did open me up to a lot of public scrutiny. I had to turn off comments, on the YouTube channel and things like that, because it does open you up to some attacks. But I'm sure you understand or are familiar how to deal with that. You just kind of have to tune them out. I have a habit of saying what I want to say and then blocking them. So my word is the last one.
I used to have a policy of not blocking, but that's changed.
Oh, yeah. We block. Block.
Thank you for telling your story. I'm sure I will get emails. It always happens. But it's like, wow, I really relate in it. So, and that's the whole point of the podcast is, the Facebook group's great. The Reddit subreddit is great, but something about hearing it, the whole story, instead of like, snippets of posts, it can be really moving. And so thank you so much for your time. And I'll put the information about the Facebook group in the show notes.
And I also want to thank you, Charlie, for providing this to the community. This is an amazing resource. Like you said, there's something about hearing the voices. It adds that level of humanity to it. You can turn it on and play it in the background while you're doing other things. I really appreciate you so much. And I want you to know that you have my support. So don't ever be afraid to reach out.
Thanks. That means a lot to me.
You're welcome. And thank you for having me.
Kratom in the headlines. This is going to be a brief segment. This episode is going to be dropping later than any other one on a Sunday, and the length of the episode is already running long. News in kratom. It was a crazy week and fairly exhausting. Some of the stories included much coverage about lawsuits, including a CBS report that delved into a young man's death in Georgia, and news articles about court verdicts for wrongful kratom death lawsuits, upward of $11 million for the nurse in Florida and $2 million plus for the father in Washington. The New York Times also had an article. FDA issued a more strongly worded regulatory statement on their website. Whether or not this is going to change anything on the ground, it's not clear. The Kratom lobby certainly fundraised off of it. The only thing I know for sure are two things about the internet. One, don't argue with anybody on the internet about presidential politics. And second, the rule applies for arguing with people about Kratom on the internet. And I was doing good for a month or so, and I had a step back this week, and I need to follow that advice. So a bit about a correction or update about medicated assisted treatment. In the earlier episode, I recommended that folks take the least amount allowed prescribed for the shortest amount of time. Jacob from last week pointed out there is some studies that showed that folks on a longer term Suboxone regimen have higher success rates, at least with regular opioids. I'll put several of those articles in the show notes. But this is in contrast to a couple other things. One, I just did an interview with somebody that did a 3 or 4 day detox short-term sub plan. And he's, somewhere around day 45. And then I also got an email, and it reads as such. I just wanted to say thank you for making your podcast. My name is Ann, and I'm a recovering Kratom addict. I was put on Suboxone in March to help me quit Kratom extract, but then ended up getting addicted to Suboxone. So now I'm in rehab. I'm not against that, though. I was told that what happened to me is rare and almost unheard of. I've been really needing a community who understands my Kratom extract addiction. Most people here just see it as like a soda addiction or something. When I saw your podcast, I felt like finally someone understands. Welcome in, and best of luck in rehab and staying in touch. So now Krista is going to do the resource of the week.
Hi, it's Krista. So today I'm going to review the article, The Slippery Slope of Kava, Kratom, and CBD. This was published in The Temper, and it was written by Rebecca Rush on August 26th of 19. I want to address today thoughts related to whether uses of substances like Delta-8, CBD, Kava are in fact a slippery slope and can lead to relapse on Kratom or other substances. I figured to start out, but I wanted to explain what Kava is just in case there's somebody out there who doesn't know. It is a plant, and the root is used to produce a drink that's consumed for sedative effects. It comes from the Pacific Ocean cultures of Polynesia, the Philippines, Melanesia, and Micronesia. Just to clarify Delta-8, I found out something interesting. I don't know if everybody knows this, but I certainly didn't. The way Delta-8, which is very big here in Florida as well, the way that is legal is due to a loophole in a farm bill that was passed in 2018. In that bill, hemp legalization was restricted to plants with low levels of Delta-9 THC, and that inadvertently legalized Delta-8 THC. And just to back up, I didn't explain, Delta-8 is a psychoactive cannabinoid found in cannabis, just like THC, but THC is Delta-9. And then finally, CBD, I think we all probably know what that is, but just for purposes of saying it, it's an herbal dietary supplement, and it is also a cannabinoid found in the cannabis plant, along with THC and Delta-8 mentioned before. It's been promoted for treatment of a lot of things. To name a few, I would say anxiety, pain, movement disorders, sleep problems, but it's not regulated by the FDA, and there aren't any proven claims of therapeutic effects really at this time. But as far as the article goes, so the author starts out by making a pretty strong point in the beginning. She says, in quotes, "When I was asking myself if these, meaning Kava or CBD, were okay to use, I was going in the wrong direction. The road to recovery isn't about pushing the limits of what you can get away with." Now, after that, despite that statement, she goes on to say she doesn't consider Kava a relapse and stated it's not really stronger than coffee, but with the opposite effect. However, she shares that it's the addictive behavior Kava perpetuates that can lead someone to relapse or deteriorate on other substances. She talks about whenever there was something she didn't like that happened, she went to the Kava bar in New York to try to drown the discomfort. And that got me to thinking about an example of how this can be a slippery slope, in that if something bad happens, we vape the CBD, we drink the Kava, take the kratom shot, smoke the weed or Delta-8, we calm down, we feel better, or we feel different somehow. And that is where what the author is talking about, that we're seeking chemical relief. And there's no difference in this structure when we seek chemical relief from Kava or CBD or Delta-8 than if you decided to use your drug of choice. The only difference is how altered the state of mind is. It's just a matter of what you fill in the blank, basically what drug of choice ends in ultimately providing that altered state of mind. She says Kava, kratom, CBD perpetuate addiction and maladaptive coping mechanisms. This got me to thinking of whether we're too quick to take something rather than incorporating lifestyle changes like diet or exercise or maybe mental health treatment, trauma work, community help or service work to others, etc. She talks about the concept of robbing ourselves of the opportunity to process our feelings. In my experience, they often say in treatment that addicts are only as emotionally mature as the age at which they first picked up a substance and began coping with emotions by checking out. So effectively not dealing with emotions. But she goes on to say that the point is to learn to face unwanted emotions and learn that unwanted emotions, uncomfortable things won't kill us and that they will pass. And that by going deeper into the pain we're feeling, we actually allow ourselves the opportunity to heal. And she says maybe that the healing is what it's all about. And that's pretty much what she covered in the article. Charlie and I were talking, Kava may be helpful initially, or CBD, or maybe even pot with withdrawals from kratom. So in the short term, it may be helpful. Long term, though, I think it can be argued that that's a slippery slope using these substances and that they could potentially lead to relapse on other substances. One thing I want to point out is, the Kava bar got me to kratom. Kratom got me to getting my medical marijuana card. It leads me to the next topic, which is the concept of progression. It just progresses. The author talks about after a 5-month period of sobriety, starting to use CBD. And then within a month, she was eating an entire THC chocolate bar, passing out for 18 hours, and then eventually bought beer. She talked about how marijuana took her back to alcohol. Personally started with Kava in 2018, used that. For me, all of my addictive behaviors were present. I was drinking these $10 drinks and I was spending so much money. I was going to the Kava bar multiple times a day. I don't know if it was the Kava at that time or the excitement or the just environment, but I kept going. Every night I would say, okay, I'm only going to go once tomorrow, or I'm not going to go, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And it never worked out. Then I had a really bad day and there it was. I relapsed on my drug of choice at that time. So I'm bringing up the point, what happens when what I'm using, CBD, Delta-8, Kava, what happens when that's no longer enough for what I'm facing on a bad day? What about how I may be able to, justify another substance? Like I could say, hey, I'm already smoking weed. Maybe a kratom shot won't hurt. I definitely think there's an argument for substances being a slippery slope. For me, in addiction, if I can feel something, if something is mind altering, if something is mood changing and it's a good thing, it feels good, I'm definitely going to want to do it again and again and again, and probably, continue to do that until I get to a point that I decide I just can't anymore, hopefully that doesn't mean you have to go to a low bottom. I think it ultimately comes down to what each individual can manage and thinks is right for them. I feel like, who am I to say what someone else should do? I can barely, figure out what direction I need to take sometimes. There does seem to be story after story in my experience that I hear of using one substance like Kava or Delta 8 and it leading back to another more dangerous, troublesome, or addictive substance. So I guess you just have to ultimately be true to yourself in the end. And I would say the path of recovery is definitely not the same for everyone, and you have to find your way. And that wraps that up. Before we close this week, though, to get in touch with us, please leave a voice message at 313-437-7720 or send an email or audio file to kratomsobriety@gmail.com. We would love to celebrate a Kratom anniversary, or if you want to share something for a future episode. You can also find us at Kratom Sobriety on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. We're also on YouTube, TikTok, and now Threads. So until next week, everybody, keep it Kratom free.